Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and this is the Keto Made Simple podcast.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Eric Westman here, and welcome to my channel where I debunk nutritional misinformation online typically. Now, sometimes I get to interview people who agree to come on, people I see as the movers and shakers in the keto and low-carb world. It's my great pleasure to have Dr. Georgia Ede today.
Thanks very much for inviting me, Dr. Westman.
Well, so to some of my followers or to some people who may not know who you are, please introduce yourself and how you got into this world, this space.
I'm a psychiatrist. I've been a psychiatrist for more than 25 years. And the first 10 years of my practice, I practiced the way most psychiatrists do, prescribing medications and doing psychotherapy, which I loved. I loved both of, I loved my work. But I changed the way I practice for two reasons. One is I think most psychiatrists would agree that most of our patients don't get that much better, no matter how hard we try to help them with the usual methods. And the other reason is that I stumbled into a new way of eating quite by accident many years ago that had mental health benefits, physical and mental health benefits for myself, which inspired me to start studying nutrition for the first time. This was quite a few years ago now. Studied nutrition and then began to incorporate these nutrition principles into my work. And now I'm a clinical educator, I'm a researcher, I'm an author, and most importantly, my favorite thing to do as a metabolic and nutritional psychiatrist, where I use food to help people reduce and sometimes even eliminate the need for psychiatric medications. My favorite thing to do is empower other people with this information so that they can start improving their own mental health. And that's why I like coming on your channel and talking about it.
Fantastic. Well, so psychiatry is, I'm an internist, and when we go through medical training, there's this sort of artificial split at the neck, isn't there? There's suddenly, well, I suppose neurology gets into the brain, but it's not the thoughts and the feelings and so how did that influence, like, for example, what you were interested in, and then also, did you get any training in nutrition? So, as an internist, below the neck, it's as if food didn't really matter, right? We took care of hearts when they fail and lungs when they fail, kidneys and all that. So I wonder, I mean, it seems like people could figure this out, that you eat something, you feel or have a thought, or anyway, looking back and how you learned this, how does one go about connecting the food with mental health?
Yeah, it's so interesting. We think when you swallow food, it goes down, right? So maybe we don't think about it also going up. But and we also, we kind of have for long time thought about the mind and the brain as separate and the brain and the body as separate. But of course the brain is part of the body, and it's an organ that can malfunction just like any other organ can. And metabolic health, as I'm sure you agree, doesn't stop at the neckline. So the metabolic health of all of our cells matters, and all of our cells need the same basic, they follow the same rules, and they need the same basic nutritional and metabolic care. So if you're not healthy below the neckline, you will not be healthy above the neckline. And no, I didn't learn anything about nutrition and mental health in 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency training. This is why I say, as is before, I kind of accidentally stumbled into this other way of thinking about things, which so many of us do, because we're not taught really the biologically sound nutrition principles and how powerful they are to heal and protect all of our cells.
Yeah, so I guess, like a lot of doctors who come into this space, you had some personal experience and improvement. How to then a lot of doctors just stop right there. They'll feel like for a while I would speak in public at meetings, and doctors might say, yeah, I have done better, but I can't talk to my patients about this. That would be, inappropriate, or for a while people would fear they would get sued to talk about back, 25 years ago, to promote the Atkins diet. It was so taboo at the time. So these days, times change. What was the second patient? Or if you started with yourself, how did you make that leap to doing this with people you were, entrusted to care for?
Right. So when I first when I first had my own personal experience with dietary changes improving my physical and mental health, because the diet that I wound up on through trial and error was almost upside down and backward from what we're told is healthy and safe for us, I did not immediately run into my clinic or my private practice and begin recommending these strategies to my patients, because I knew nothing about nutrition at that point. I did not want to harm my patients. I did not want to use a strategy in my work that I didn't understand. And so that would have been reckless and irresponsible. And so what I did was for years, let's see, I could count back, it must have been at least 5 years before I started, and I studied nutrition intensively, independently. I also took a graduate school course in nutrition. I studied intensively so that I could convince myself that these principles were sound and that they were safe, and that they were worth exploring. And now I had an advantage in psychiatry that people in internal medicine and cardiology and certain other fields don't necessarily have, is that in psychiatry, there really is no dietary guideline in psychiatry. So it wasn't as though anybody was saying, well, that would be bad for the brain, because people weren't really talking about food in the brain. So there was a little bit more flexibility there and more open-mindedness, I think. And then the first patient that I can recall who was willing to try this different way of eating was a graduate student with panic attacks and emotional eating and cravings and insomnia. What really felt to her as though she had anxiety throughout the course of the day, and that she was also feeling irritable and hungry between meals. And she didn't want to take medication. The medications that are typically prescribed for people with anxiety and panic attacks, many of them fall into this category of benzodiazepines. These are medicines, brand names like Ativan and Klonopin and Xanax, Valium, medicines in that family, which are really problematic. They can, make people feel tired and dizzy, and they can also cause dependence and even addiction. So they're not a low risk option. And a lot of people don't want to take those medicines. And she was very health conscious and said, is there anything else I can do? And so I recommended that she simply switch her diet to whole foods, low carbohydrate diet. This was not a medical ketogenic plan. This was just, let's take the carbs down to about 20 grams per day. Whole foods, mostly meat and poultry and low non-starchy vegetables and fat, cheese, things like that. And within a couple of weeks, her symptoms were, this was her own words now, and I put this case example in the book, 90% better. So no medication whatsoever. And so this was the first time that I had seen somebody try these principles and have results. And once you have that experience, it's really motivating to try to bring it to more patients and see what else might be possible.
Yeah, well, that's interesting that like most doctors who come across this, we have to retrain. Until we feel comfortable enough to do it with another person. I was fortunate enough to be able to do clinical trials, meaning, 50, 100 people at a time. But most people don't have that that luxury. But so then, what was your thought process with the third patient, the fourth patient?
Well, I mean, what I gradually came to understand and become so passionate about is that these dietary when you apply the truth about nutrition and metabolism to the human brain and body, people feel better. And it really doesn't matter what the diagnosis is, because all cells follow the same rules and need the same care, the same nutrients, the same protection. They all cells want you to have, need you to have your glucose and your insulin levels in a healthy range. All cells need you to eat foods which can deliver essential nutrients throughout the body safely. And all cells need you to avoid foods which are damaging, which cause things like inflammation and glucose spikes and something called oxidative stress, which is why we're always told to eat more antioxidants. But if you know what these rules are, you can have much more control over your mental health than you thought might be possible in many cases.
Yeah, and it's almost like you're talking as if you have to defend the fact that the brain is an organ that needs energy. And yeah, anyway, I understand. I'm the son of a psychiatrist, not a psychiatrist. I think that's what made me one reason to go into internal medicine, where, I mean, you couldn't, fake a creatinine, a kidney failure of 5 or something. But yeah, the brain needs fuel, but for the longest time, we were taught the brain needed sugar, brain needed carbs. What's up with that?
Well, so the brain does need sugar, it does need glucose. So glucose is the sugar that's circulating in the bloodstream, as most of your viewers will probably already know. So glucose, that is the circulating sugar in your bloodstream, the brain does need some glucose at all times to function at its best. But A, it doesn't need very much. And B, if you give it too much, it causes a lot of problems. It actually physically damages the brain. Too much glucose in the brain will literally stick. It will stick to vital components throughout the brain, and this will through a series of chain events, cause waves of inflammation and waves of damaging oxidative stress, and it can disrupt the chemicals in the brain, causing chemical imbalances. We're told all the time, we're trained as psychiatrists to think of mental health conditions from major to minor as chemical imbalances in the brain. Well, what's causing those chemical imbalances in the first place? So it actually turns out that our food choices have a lot to do with how balanced our brain chemistry is. And the funny thing about the brain needing glucose is that the more glucose you eat, the more sugary your diet is, the harder it becomes for your brain to turn that sugar into energy. You can actually damage that glucose processing system over time. And so it sounds upside down, but that's how it is. And so a lot of people think, well, my brain needs sugar. Well, yes, it does. But the more sugar you eat, the harder it will be to use it. And the other funny upside down thing is that the brain, the most powerful way to balance your brain chemistry is to unbalance your diet. And that's also something that's kind of hard for people to wrap their heads around, but it's true. If you take the carbohydrates down nice and low to where you can start to burn more fat for energy and turn that into ketones, those ketones help energize the brain, and they help bridge that energy gap that so many of us have from damaging our glucose processing system over so many years.
Yeah, well, it's such an important concept that that the brain can use glucose, and there was a thought for decades that there had to be hundreds of grams in the diet but no, your body can make its own glucose. But really important that you said in the same sentence that too much glucose can be a problem. But then now we're getting over into neurology, aren't we? The brain, and well, I'm thinking more of insulin resistance over time causing dementia, and that there's a funny crossing between disciplines where neurologists think in terms of dementia and delirium, and psychiatrists more at the mood. Anyway, so it's all the same organ, isn't it?
Yeah, the brain isn't divided into neurology cells and psychiatry cells. It's one organ, and it can malfunction in various different ways. And it's just that neurologists have studied brain conditions that have physical symptoms, for example, seizure or a tremor, for example. Those are, or multiple sclerosis, where you might have numbness and weakness in various places in the body. Physical symptoms, and psychiatrists study brain conditions that cause emotional conditions or problems with thought or emotion or behavior rather than physical symptoms. And so, but these are all brain cell malfunction. They're all the same. It's an imaginary line, really.
Huh. Well, again, crossing kind of epilepsy 100 years ago, about the same time this diet was used for weight and diabetes reversal. This diet, the ketogenic diet for epilepsy, kind of a kissing cousin related diet, had a different upbringing or pedigree with Russell Wilder and Johns Hopkins, and but even then, fasting as a treatment of fits and seizures, some argue goes back into the biblical times, where people would have fasting instituted, and so there's no question what you eat can affect the brain. It can actually reverse childhood seizures, right? So, but again, a seizure is kind of as long as there's no tumor or something, there's no anatomic thing you can put your finger on typically, and yet I could see how getting great nutrition can cross neurology and psychiatry, and I hope that a viewer who isn't into the detail of all this will just kind of accept that, yeah, good nutrition for brain cells will help or could improve neurology and psychiatric issues.
Yeah, we think about, a lot of people think about, when they hear ketogenic diet, they think of weight loss, and it can certainly help people lose weight. Although, depending on how you build it, it can also help you maintain weight or even gain weight. If it only caused weight loss, then all of us who have been on a ketogenic diet for a number of years would have long since disappeared. Thing, right? So you don't. It's not necessarily a weight loss. It was really, really useful to help people lose weight, burn fat, lose weight. But it was originally created to stabilize brain chemistry in 1921. Children who were having seizures, before the availability of useful seizure medications, which came many years later. So, and as you said, people have known since biblical times, or maybe even longer, that when people with seizures fasted, their seizures would often improve. And so this diet was created to try to get as close to fasting as possible without starving people to death, because you can't fast forever. And so that was the original version of the epilepsy version of the ketogenic diet. And there are many more relaxed forms of the ketogenic diet that we use today in psychiatry as well as in neurology. The ketogenic diets exist on a spectrum of very strict to more relaxed, and so and which version works for you is just going to depend on who you are. So some people need much stronger dose of ketones, and some don't. So there's so much potential here for all kinds of brain conditions, and the research is bearing that out. The research is exploding in this area across all kinds of diagnoses in psychiatry, and clinical experience is mounting as we get more and more published cases and more clinical experience with our own patients, seeing what's possible across really just about every diagnosis you can imagine.
Well, as an internist, I opened a clinic treating obesity and diabetes reversal. And to my surprise, about 10 days back in the days when I could see people in 2 weeks, Now it's longer, I'm afraid. But anyway, this one came in to me, and she looked at me and she said, my seizures are, or, excuse me, my voices are gone. And this is when we had paper charts. So, and I looked under the chart and I was like, well, it turns out I was treating her for obesity, but clear throughout her chart is she had schizophrenia and some version of, that's the other thing is psychiatrists seem to needlessly bicker about what type of schizophrenia or it didn't matter to me. Her voices were gone, and she had also visual hallucinations, which made it a complicated diagnosis. Anyway, all those things improved within 2 weeks of changing the diet, and that opened my eyes to this whole world of perhaps helping the psychiatric issues. We wrote up the case. Other cases were written up about that at that time. And it's been fascinating to see that grow, although I don't see the penetration in the internet sphere, the internet, the Twitter, I don't know, we call it today X verse. I don't see a lot of pre-post. So back in about the year 2000, when I started getting into this, there were innumerable before and afters of weight loss, even back in the kind of rudimentary internet at that time. I'm not seeing a whole lot of before after mental health thing. My schizophrenia is gone. All that. Is it because it's harder to do, or that it's not so powerful as like weight loss? Everyone gets benefit from it. What's your sense now that it's sort of been out there as a concept, or do we really need to wait for these clinical studies to know how how effective it's going to be, how difficult it will be?
Well, three things I want to say to that. So one is to come back to the case that you published in 2009, because you were saying that case really changed the way you thought about this. And I want to just say that case changed the way a lot of us thought about this. It was the first well-documented case of a person with mental illness responding to carbohydrate restriction. Full stop. And so there was some there was a paper in the 1960s vaguely describing 10 women, hospitalized women with psychotic conditions who improved on a ketogenic diet, but there was very little information in that paper to go on. And then the field lay silent from 1965, I believe that case was, that paper was written, to the 2009 case that you published. That was case zero. And
Okay.
I want to really thank you for publishing that, because it was one of the papers that I came across when I first started learning, studying for myself. And so wonderful, right? And so now we've got lots and lots more cases published and clinical trials published, and we've got randomized controlled trials in the works, and even a couple small ones published in certain conditions. So the science is really mounting. But another thing I wanted to respond to here was, we were saying, we see before and after weight loss testimonials online all the time. We still see a lot of those, because this diet, it is a wonderful diet for burning fat. And who doesn't want, if you want to lose weight, you've got to be able to burn fat, right? But there are two things to say about why you don't see more testimonials. One is you have to know where to look, and I can point people to a place to look. But the other is that there's a lot of stigma around mental health. And so many people who improve a mental health condition may not want to be public about it. But that is changing. People are more, I think, through the age of social media, people are more comfortable, some people anyway, sharing those kinds of benefits. And so one place I can point people to, and this really was very moving to me and inspiring to me, is a few weeks ago I was on a podcast called Diary of a CEO. And the podcast isn't a nutrition podcast. It has a large reach, but it's the kinds of people who are listening to the podcast aren't necessarily in the keto sphere, so to speak, right? Thousands of comments underneath that video hundreds of testimonials of people saying a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet or this special, different types of carbohydrate restriction, resolved not just multiple mental health conditions, but multiple physical health conditions, just hundreds of stories. And I was surprised I had never seen that many come through in such a short period of time. So I do think that we're at a turning point where people are starting to kind of come out of the woodwork and say, hey, look, this happened to me too. This happened to me too. This happened to me too. So I do think things are changing that way.
Good. Yeah. And that, what a great point. It depends where you look. I'm still at the point of, I don't quite think that every time there's a comment on a video that it's real.
Of course not. Of course.
Well, why would someone lie? I mean, why? Of course, it could be someone trolling. It could be the same bot doing the same thing over. But I mean, I doubt that. So, I mean, there is a bit of skepticism, but also you have to be positive at the same time. I think that's awesome to count up that hundreds, because I probably didn't find hundreds of pictures of before and after, 25 years ago. But the stigma about mental health will make it a little harder. The other thing I can think of is that especially if it's a family unit, or if someone's on their own and quite disorganized, they may need assistance in doing it, depending on the severity of the mental illness. And that kind of gets me to the idea of group homes or even now there's just a signal about retirement homes helping with keto and that what an awesome place to, people are captive basically, and with permission, you feed them meat and some veg maybe, and then they lose weight, get off their diabetes, their Alzheimer's and pre-Alzheimer's. I mean, are there still behavioral centers where, or even then, I know there are some rehab centers where people might be able to check in, but has this penetrated into those areas to your knowledge?
Yeah, so this is a very new field, but there are people who are setting up small residential treatment programs, app-based coaching programs where it's intensive kind of outpatient work, but mostly remote. And then there are clinic systems, a couple in the country, which are starting to branch into metabolic psychiatry. And you might be referring to when you're talking about there's a group of assisted living facilities run by Hal Cranmer in Arizona, where he is using nutrition to help people become more independent and go back home, going into assisted living and then coming actually back out again because they're get well, right?
Most people think it's a one-way ticket in, right?
Yes, exactly. So there are these innovative programs being established by forward-thinking, progressive, entrepreneurial minded psychiatrists and metabolic practitioners. And some of these are gathering research and gathering data. They're sort of a dual purpose. So they're helping people clinically, but they're also gathering data that can be published to sort of bolster these ideas and help them to spread. So, and these are all in the very, very early stages. But there are a number of them in the United States, and then they're even starting to crop up in Europe and other places around the world. So we're at this really exciting time. It's a really exciting time to be a psychiatrist, and a really hopeful time and an empowering time to be a person with a mental health issue or to have a loved one with a mental health issue, because we now have a brand new way of thinking about things, a brand new way of approaching things that is bringing unprecedented relief to most people who are willing to try it and give it a good long go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. And how did you, I see your book in the back on the table. I have it on my how did you get in the idea to write a book? And can you summarize it and the process and the content? I highly recommend people to look at it, actually.
Thank you. As I started studying nutrition in 2007, 2008, and the more I learned and the more I began incorporating these principles into my work, and the more excited I got about it, the more I wanted to write about it. But I really wanted to make sure that I had enough experience and enough knowledge to put together a book that was worth writing. And because the field is very new, I really took my time with it. So it's been many years, 15 or more years of study and practice. And then the book itself took 2 years to write. My goal with this book, so it's called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. And the goal in the book is to put everything in one place about brain food that people need to know. So about half the book is about the truth about nutrition, kind of pulling apart all these myths and wiping the slate clean and putting the truth in place, installing the truth in its place about which foods are good for us, which foods are bad for us, what the real risks and benefits are of grains and the real risks and benefits of red meat, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other half of the book is really about mental health and how food affects the brain and what you can do to improve your own brain health. And it includes not just a ketogenic diet, because I know that's a non-starter for some people. There's also a more relaxed plan that people can start off with if they're not keen on keto, that's much healthier than what most people are eating now. So there's a sort of a modified paleo plan called a quiet paleo plan. There's a quiet keto plan, and there's a quiet carnivore plan for people to explore. So it's really what I've tried to do in the book is for people who think they've tried everything, I want them to know that if they're willing to try one more thing, hope is on the menu. And there's guidance, there's information, there's lots of practical help in the book to give you as much as I could possibly fit for patients and families and physicians and nutrition professionals and practitioners.
Yeah, and that's important to know that it's not just for someone with mental illness. So I think this is a great read for anyone who's just kind of curious about the brain and how to help the brain function over time, with anecdotes and I have to say it's extremely well written, very, very engaging, and I'm pretty honest about our book. I had a professional writer to help me write it, actually. That's Amy Berger with End Your Carb Confusion. Were you a writer by background, or got assistance as well?
I am very, I'm a very slow and writing's painful for me, but I'm a very slow writer. But I also did write the book myself because I thought I think that's why it took so long to write, right? But I really wanted it to be my own voice in this book, and wanted to really have a lot of control over the expression of these ideas. I would have loved to have had somebody help me with it. I did have editorial help. I did hire a professional editor to read and give me feedback about every chapter, because I'm not a professional writer. And that was really useful to me, because tone and context for somebody, I'm very close to these ideas. So when I would write a chapter and I would send it off to him, and he would say, why do we need to even be talking about this right here? Or I'm not really sure I understand what you're saying here. Or why do I need to know this? So that was valuable, because if I'd written without that kind of support, it would have come out perhaps not as effective as I think it has been.
Yeah, well, I wonder about the feedback you've had. I've had many patients come in already, having read your book, that helped them personally, but also as a family unit, a family with child with schizophrenia, for example, and that's often a barometer or a temperature. I'm hearing people read it and they come into me to talk about it. How has your feedback been?
Oh, well, that is music to my ears, what you just told me. I wrote the book to help people. And if you know, that's, I love hearing that. So I've been getting really positive feedback about the book from individuals and families and colleagues. And, the book's also recommended in the New York Times Book Review, which I'm was very pleased to see. And so I'm very, very relieved that it has been well received, but mostly that it's helping people. Uh, I love that it's helping people with mental health conditions, but I also love that it's helping colleagues to open their minds to a new way of practicing, because we psychiatrists, most of us, if we're being honest with ourselves, we need new ways. We need a new way forward. Our treatments don't help enough people. They don't work well enough, and they really do fail. They really do fail most people ultimately. And so, and it's not about practicing, throwing all of those other strategies away and replacing it with nutrition. These strategies work well in combination with psychotherapy. They work well in combination with medications. In fact, that most of the clinical trials and the case studies that have been published, they start with their medication. They add the diet to the medication, and uh, and in some cases they're able to come off the medication. Other cases not. But you don't need to choose one way or the other. You can combine these two strategies and in very effective ways. So, and as we showed in the paper that you helped me publish in 2022, Dr. Albert Denon's work in France, where the 28 of those 31 patients with serious mental illness improved substantially on a whole foods, very mildly ketogenic diet, patterned after the work that you've done over many years in your own research. And that all of those people were taking multiple psychiatric medications, on 5 psychiatric medications on average, and adding the diet to those medications allowed them to improve the side effects. We saw that a lot of these medications cause obesity. They cause type 2 diabetes. They cause, metabolic problems. But even though most of these people were taking powerful antipsychotic medications, which are notorious for causing weight gain and high blood sugar levels and those sorts of things, even almost every one of those people lost weight when they added the diet to the medication. And 64% of people left the hospital on less psychiatric medication. So you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So you can just incorporate these nutrition principles and metabolic principles into your work and see if that helps people tolerate their medications better, or maybe even need less medication over time.
Yeah, well, that was a great experience I had just helped with the data collection and analyses, and thanks for the heavy lifting of writing it up and getting it published. I'm thinking that was a pretty impactful article. Except you never know if it's just of the moment and then whether it will have legs. I wonder, switching gears a bit. So most of my clients or patients, may have grandkids, may have children, and they look, the stories I hear is it's hard to influence always what's happening through your children and the grandchildren. But I'm very curious how to use what you've learned. There are these movies like The Magic Pill, where there's a very dramatic improvement in just a real behaviorally difficult child by cutting the magic pill being the keto diet, cutting carbs out. How would you advise, I guess, a patient of mine who otherwise is curious about, doesn't have a diagnosed mental illness, but might be anxious and all, but then also seeing their family, maybe what would the alerts be that maybe the grandchild, really should pay attention to the whatever in the food? Is there a way for you to look at that with a psychiatrist lens?
So, if I understand you correctly, you're asking like, if you've got a family member or a person that you care about who is reluctant to look at dietary changes or may not be motivated or may not be convinced that it matters, that food matters to the brain and to mental health. This is probably most of what I spend my time doing, is talking about this issue, because most people, we've been led to believe that food really doesn't matter that much to the brain. And we think about food as, okay, well, it's a way to control my weight, or it's a way to control my cholesterol levels, right? And that's certainly how I thought about it for my entire life, until, especially growing up with a weight issue my whole life. I just thought of my food choices as a way to control my weight, full stop. And I wasn't doing a very good job doing it either, because I had the wrong information about how you manage your weight. So most people don't understand how important it is. And there's a lot of resistance to changing diet in this particular way, meaning the low carbohydrate way, because carbohydrates are delicious, addictive, convenient, inexpensive parts of our lives. So there's a lot.
Aside for those things.
A lot, right? So there are many, many barriers, right? So one of the reasons I wrote the book is because, like I said, about a good 50% of it is about helping people understand the truth about nutrition. So whether you've got a mental health issue or not, what is a good diet for human beings to eat, to lay the groundwork for a life of good mental and physical health. And so, what foods do children need to eat to be well? And so children, just like adults, need, their cells follow the same rules, right? So one is just like, okay, what does a healthy diet look like for a kid? And I think most of us, would agree that it shouldn't contain junk food and ultra processed foods and things like that. And then it should at least be a whole foods diet, right? And so if parents can't kind of bring themselves to go there, they're certainly not going to go to a low carbohydrate whole foods diet. But even getting families to go to whole foods can be very tricky. But one of the fields that I think is really motivating in this way is there were a number of studies conducted in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s in Europe, and by different researchers, looking at children with ADHD, children and teenagers with ADHD, pretty common, unfortunately, a pretty common condition, more and more common all the time. And some of these kids had ADHD to the point that they were hospitalized. They were so severely impaired by their condition. So ADHD, like everything else, exists on a spectrum of mild to moderate to severe. So some of these kids were having a lot of difficulty. In any case, different researchers in different places, working with these children, recommended for them something called a few foods diet. This few foods diet was essentially a diet with just a few foods in it, mostly whole foods, free of foods that are thought of as common food allergy and food sensitivity culprits. So they took out the dairy, they took out the nuts, they took out the chocolate, they took out things that tend to bother or can bother sensitive people. And so it was essentially things like turkey and lamb and vegetables and fruit, some apple juice and margarine and rice, things like that. So it wasn't a perfect diet, but it was very simple and mostly whole foods. It was not a low carb diet. It was not a ketogenic diet. It was just a simple, mostly whole foods diet. 62 to 82% response rate within weeks on that diet. And I can't remember now the percentage. I want to say close to 3/4 of kids, depending on the study, achieved remission from ADHD within weeks of starting these diets, depending on which study you looked at. So that doesn't tell us necessarily which aspects of the diet were the problem, because when you go from a regular diet to this very special few foods diet, you're making an awful lot of changes, right? But what does it tell you? It tells you that food matters to the brain, that food can be the problem in most children. And so who doesn't have a few weeks to give that a try? It's safe, 100% safe. And think of the potential benefits. So we're actually now, I'm in one of the research studies that I'm involved in right now is a research study being run by the Children's Mental Health Resource Center. And the principal investigator is Elizabeth Arico. And we're now in our second cohort. These are children with bipolar disorder who are trying a ketogenic diet to see if it helps. And the preliminary results are really astonishing, what we're seeing so far. So I'm very excited about being able to play a small part in helping families to understand how critically important nutrition is to children's mental health.
Well, that's great to hear. And I'm glad you're involved in the new data collection. I guess as we switch to research in this area, I'm heartened to hear that you're dealing with children. When I kind of step back, I don't see a whole lot of pediatrics involvement with keto. I don't. If anything, there are a few books here and there, but don't see pediatric. Even the Duke Pediatric group, that's an endowed, funded area for obesity, just doesn't. I don't know. They're looking at the microbiome. Anyway. So we should mention the Bazookies, the Bazooki group, Metabolic Mind. In a nutshell, how is this advanced? And we're going to see a whole lot of research, hopefully soon, right?
Yes. And so this is really important work that's being done. It's really trailblazing. This is a trailblazing organization. The Bazooki Group has launched not too long ago a platform called Metabolic Mind. And Metabolic Mind is growing all the time with new resources. It's a website. It's a YouTube channel. It even now includes a self-help platform, a self-help framework called Think Smart. It was just launched last week. And this, if you go to the Metabolic Mind website, there you can read or watch videos of testimonials from people, even with very serious mental illnesses, who have recovered using ketogenic diets and other special diets as well, but primarily ketogenic diets. So you can hear the voices, see the faces of real people who have put their mental illnesses into recovery, and you can listen to interviews with specialists, experts, scientists, clinicians, entrepreneurs who are doing exciting work in this space, and then Dr. Brett Scher hosts the Metabolic Mind YouTube channel, where he conducts a lot of these interviews himself, and just you can be right up to the minute with everything that's going on in metabolic psychiatry. And all of this is thanks to Jan Ellison-Bazooki. So Jan Ellison-Bazooki, who is just a pioneer in the field and an intellectual powerhouse in her own right, but whose son recovered and has now been at least 3 years now from severe bipolar disorder, using a ketogenic diet, and that was what inspired her to really spearhead this movement, this metabolic psychiatry movement. And she funds a lot of the clinical trials going on around the world.
If only two people like that family would be philanthropic. We would have 100 times more research in this area. That's been so great to see. But I guess we don't have to wait for governmental agencies. But the old saying is that you have to already have done what you're going to get funded to do through NIH. It's a very kind of conservative thing. So maybe this will be the pilot work that then the NIMH or other governmental agencies will start ponying on, or, leapfrogging, if you will. But yeah, that's just fantastic. And, I mentioned the lack of pediatricians. I take that back. We were invited to a meeting in Indonesia, and I met a pediatrician there who was telling me about the keto babies. What do you remember about our trip to Jakarta and Tio Presidio?
Ah, that trip was a highlight of my life, my personal life as well as my professional life, and it was great to be able to spend time with you both in Jakarta and then in Bali afterward, which was just an amazing experience. But that conference, I mean, it just is etched in my heart because there's something about being there and surrounded by people who were so passionate and so committed and so excited about the healing properties of the ketogenic diet. You remember how everybody would stand with they'd make this K, they'd stand there, they were keto warriors, right? And so they would stand in a group and they would hold up their K, and this was sort of, they would make this hand signal. Basically, that was their way of symbolizing that that was going to be their shield against the high carbohydrate world, right? That it was an affirmation. We are going to eat this way, not that way. And Tio Presidio, who's he had hundreds of thousands of followers. He had inspired to follow this, what he called keto fastosis, the power of low carbohydrate diet plus intermittent fasting, which had helped his own son with his son's condition. So it was one of
Cerebral palsy.
So, thank you. I couldn't remember what I knew was a neurological issue, and that conference was so full of heart. I just couldn't. The love of the people and how warmly welcomed we were and how colorful and how beautiful and how generous everybody was. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, tell me for you.
After I think it was 3 days of pretty grueling talks. I mean, it was high science, they bring out the flower arrangements and all that. And then there was Alif, the son, who was told that he would never be able to walk and talk, and he comes walking up onto the stage. What a memorable experience, and really, best I can tell, it was Tio, the father of someone who loved biochemistry, someone affected by and helped by the diet. He went and kind of lobbied and taught these doctors all around Indonesia, and which really is an inspiration for if you want to teach your doctor, you can, or other people. But yeah, what a great meeting I'm now talking more like a psychiatrist. What a great feeling it was to be there.
It was, and our time zone was upside down, right? So we were so jet lagged and so exhausted, and yet so invigorated by the people. And and Tio had gathered policymakers and people from the government, people from public health, people from the medical community. It was a really high impact conference where you had representatives from all these different sectors that could influence the way things are done. And so it was like I said, a highlight of my professional life.
Well, I'm hopeful it helped a seed to grow, or a seedling to grow and help folks in that part of the world. I'm a member of that Facebook group, the Keto Fastosis Indonesia, and it's all Indonesian, but mainly. But from time to time, I can see what's going on there. But again, what a wonderful time to go there and to be with you as well. I really think back fondly of that trip for sure.
Me too.
Well, again, thank you for your time today, and thanks for all of your effort in the psychiatric space. Although it's it's just another internal organ. As spoken as an internist, sorry, but and your book has been wonderful, helped so many people. Thank you for being on the show, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much for everything you've done to support metabolic psychiatry and for helping get the movement started with that very first case report, and for helping with that research paper. I'm eternally grateful.
I got you. Till the next time.
All right.
See you later. Bye-bye. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.